so good to catch up with you. How was your trip?
Oh my goodness, it was so much fun. Montreal is beautiful. And the shopping there, so good. Look at the purse I got. Isn't it cute?
Ooh, so nice.
Oh, I love it. Whoever said money can't buy happiness is crazy.
Well, that's an overgeneralization.
Please. Our country is founded on fashion. The pursuit of profit is of utmost importance. Like, for example, in the 1500s, countries did not just colonize land it found, it had to give an advantage to the crown to be colonized. When Cartier came to Canada, he was searching for the riches of the Orient and found nothing. With no economic gain, the colonization of the New World never took root. The French just used Canada as a natural resource shed where the French traders would come, exploit the natural resources, and return to France.
Oh, like an avatar.
Yeah, exactly. So, to gain greater economic success, the French companies became allies with the Huron, who acted as like a middleman and got them the felts for the European goods. The system worked well for a time, but ultimately led to the destruction of the Hurons by the Iroquois. Yeah. So, with the loss of the middleman, the French had to come up with a new trading style. The new style was the creation of colonies by the crown. Since the traders were so profitable, the crown reasoned it would be worth setting up colonies to protect Canada's resources. So, our country was founded on free enterprise and consumerism.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I hardly think it's the most important. What about freedom and self-determination?
Well, what do you mean?
Okay, take a look at today's headlines. Haven't you heard about what's going on in Quebec?
Would you judge me if I said no?
No. Okay, listen. So earlier this month, the Quebec government proposed a charter of values that would ban public servants, but not members of the legislature, from wearing religious symbols such as a hijab, turban, kippah, or large crucifix at work, and require people receiving or providing government services to uncover their faces.
That will never happen.
Well, you're probably right. It's possible that Premier Pauline Marois, who is pro-separatist, might I add, has an agenda to physically show the separation of church and state in order to imply that the federal government has not taken action to do so. It's really interesting to see how the Parti Québécois government is turning against Quebec's history of religious tolerance. With the Quebec Act, protection of the Catholic religion was enshrined in law, but in the process of decolonization, Quebec emphasized the separation of church and state. Yet, the Charter of Values will not require the removal of conspicuous religious signs such as the crucifix in the National Assembly.
Oh.
What really bugs me is the hypocrisy that this post-colonial state apparently freed itself from religious institutionalization, but is still maintaining large religious symbols.
Okay, you guys take me back. I don't even remember what the Quebec Act is.
Okay, so we know that the French were ultimately defeated by the British in 1763, right?
Right.
Okay. The British took over administration of the colony and turned the colonizers into the colonized.
That's confusing.
Okay, just think of colonialism as more of a communal feeling of subjectivity, and it'll be easier to think of Quebec as Britain's colony.
Okay.
So the British issued the Quebec Act in 1774 in an attempt to guarantee the loyalty of the French Canadians should revolutionaries in the 13 colonies seek an ally. So in essence, the Quebec Act enlarged the territory of Quebec, granted religious freedom and the right to hold public office for Roman Catholics, and enshrined French civil law. But despite the benevolence of granting them freedom of religion, French Canadians remained the subordinates of a foreign imperial force and could no longer dictate the terms of their own society.
So you're saying that Quebec isn't free? Is it still like that today?
Well, not really. Quebecois don't feel as oppressed today, particularly since the Quiet Revolution.
Oh, I know all about the Quiet Revolution. It was a movement that took place in the 1960s when, for the first time ever, the Liberal Party, run by Jean Lesage, won the provincial election. At this time, Quebec had felt it had inferior status in a place where it constituted the majority.
Exactly. I just mentioned how Quebecois were oppressed by Anglophone culture. The Quiet Revolution was really about Quebec's growing nationalist consciousness.
No, I actually don't think the Quiet Revolution...
Oh, okay, hold on. Listen. The Quiet Revolution saw Quebec society protesting against Anglophone social and economic dominance and the Catholic Church's control of social institutions. Lesage oversaw the expansion of government institutions in order to reduce the Church's role. For example, the government created Quebec's modern school system by replacing the Church with a Department of Education. And you know how we always hear about colonies fighting back against their colonial overlords?
Yeah.
Well, the idea of Quebec separatism drew increasing support during the Quiet Revolution. And one of the effects was the almost guerrilla war waged by extremist groups, like the FLQ, against English colonialism. So, I'd say the Quiet Revolution definitely freed Quebec in a sense. They asserted their right to govern themselves and distanced themselves from the imperial center with the notion of a special status.
They sure get themselves a special status.
Okay, what do you mean?
I mean, yeah, they got political freedom, but at what cost?
Okay, let me guess. This is about money again.
Of course it is. Haven't you learned by now? Everything is about money, especially the Quiet Revolution. Before the Quiet Revolution, Quebec's economy was largely controlled by foreign investors. When Lesage gained political power, one of the first changes he worked for was social and economic emancipation of French Canadians.
He wanted Quebec to be masters of their own house.
So to do this, the government opened many new corporations and nationalized the hydroelectric company. In fact, the government spending increased from $745 million to $2.1 billion. Whew, yeah. By the end of the 60s, the government was the province's biggest employer.
Well, what's wrong with that?
Well, this growth was superficial. The government was spending money it didn't have. These programs put Quebec into debt. In fact, in 2012, Quebec had the greatest provincial debt in Canada, with a debt of $21.5 thousand per person. Now it falls on other provinces to subsidize Quebec's provincial programs. Not exactly my definition of masters in my own house.
Okay, but what's wrong with the other provinces helping Quebec out?
Well, that's exactly what the federal government thought when it introduced the National Energy Program.
Okay, what's that?
The National Energy Program was introduced by Pierre Trudeau in October 1980. Prior to this program being introduced, the world oil prices skyrocketed 160%. This high price would be of the utmost advantage to these provinces in which the oil was produced, namely Western Canada. However, in Eastern Canada, the high price of oil came at a great cost. So, to help the East, Trudeau proposed the National Energy Program. The National Energy Program was meant to gain oil self-sufficiency and redistribute the wealth towards the federal government and consumers. The West saw this plan only as a way for the government to steal their money and ruin their livelihood. It should be noted that this plan could have worked if oil prices didn't drop drastically just a couple years after the program was introduced. It also could be argued that this program was one of the biggest flops of the Liberal government, resulting in hundreds of bankrupt Albertans, a broken energy program devoid of investors, and only a few extra dollars seen in the East.
Wow. So, do you think if the Quiet Revolution never happened, the Liberal government wouldn't have introduced the NEP?
I don't know. All I know is that when the government tried to even things out and help out all the provinces, it came at a great cost to the West.
So this ties into what I was saying about freedom. Like you were saying, if the government had allowed things to flow naturally, the West would have flourished.
Oppression comes in all forms. I do understand why you think freedom is important, but I think free enterprise is also a pressing issue for today.
I guess that's true. Hey, I'm hungry. Let's go have dinner.
Okay, sounds good.